Welcome to the Legal Advice in Paradise podcast, brought to you by www.legaladviceinparadise.com. Even in one of the most beautiful places in the world, life can be litigious. On this podcast, the best and brightest legal minds gather to help you navigate your way through every legal question you may face. This program will help you know your rights, know what steps to take, and help you find the best legal representation, all in simple, easy to understand terms. And now, here's your host, Justine Gronwald.
Hello, Agents of Change. This is Justine Gronwald with another episode of Legal Advice in Paradise. And today I have one of Hawaii's top family law attorneys.
Wow.
Bradley A. Coates.
That'd be me.
Yeah. How many years of practice?
I think this is 36.
36.
I've been running the Coates Frey firm and its predecessor, the Law Office of Brad Coates, and its predecessor before that, Rolfing Smith and Coates. So I've been doing this for quite a while.
And you've been around. You've seen everything.
I've seen literally tens of thousands of divorce cases. This firm we've got 10 attorneys in the firm, and we've probably handled over 20,000 divorces over the last 35 years. So a lot.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
And listeners, I'm going to let you in on something. Bradley Coates was my attorney when I was 24 years old. Unfortunately, I have been married 3 times, and he took care of the first one.
24 years old. Seems like only yesterday, Christine.
Yeah. But anyway, we're going to cover divorce and what it entails, how it affects the family, the statistics of divorce, and what to expect when sitting down with an attorney such as Brad. And so I'm going to let Brad take over right now and give us a little bit about the background and national statistics.
Well, a lot of people get divorced. Actually, everybody talks about that statistic about there being half of all marriages ending in divorce, and it's actually the breakdown is about 45% of first marriages end in divorce, 65% of second marriages end in divorce, and fully 85% of third marriages end in divorce. So
yeah, unfortunately, I would fall into that
you'd
category.
Be high risk.
And not proud of that, but I know I discussed this with you earlier when I asked you to be on the show. You know, exactly how many people do you see in this revolving door of more than 1 or 2 marriages?
Lots of people are on their second marriages.
Mm.
The biggest problem with second marriages is trying to integrate kids from the first marriages.
Exactly.
You know, the Brady Bunch style. They work well on TV, but it's oftentimes a deal breaker for actual family mechanics. So that becomes a problem. Second marriages that have got stepkids are like twice as likely to divorce as second marriages without. So.
And then of course key causes to this.
Well, that could be any number of things. The ones that I talk about when I speak on divorce are oftentimes the same ones that you see in the sort of on the daytime soap operas. You got, it's money, sex, and family. Money can be too much or too little. During this last Great Recession, money turned into that was the single biggest issue for marriage in the last few years. Since 2007. Sex, again, too much or too little, maybe not enough inside, too much outside of the marriage, whatever happens there. And family can be anything from different viewpoints on raising kids to meddling in-laws. There's, all kinds of issues that can arise with family. And,
people don't realize, and I know this is going to be part of what you're going to talk to us about, but you mentioned finances and how it stresses the marriage and the family. However, people don't realize that when you get divorced, what happens with the finances then? It's even worse.
Well, what happens then usually is that it decimates the finances. I mean, you don't want to go around chopping everything you own in half, all the time. The standard of living, it's been traceable that the standard of living for men rises oftentimes after divorce, whereas that for women it's much more difficult. Women oftentimes wind up that matronly thing where they sort of wind up taking care of the kids, and it doesn't happen all the time. Nowadays, joint custody is quite common, but a lot of times women who have not maybe advanced as far in their career and whatever, alimony in Hawaii at least, alimony is very rare. Less than 9% of all cases in Hawaii have alimony.
Wow.
So
yeah.
it's a real shocker for the Wahinis a lot of the time.
Right. That's too bad. And let's go into the difference between contested and uncontested, because there's a huge difference between the two. And let's educate the listening public, for those who don't understand what the difference is.
That's probably the single biggest issue that you've got to try and scope out when you're getting divorced, is whether or not you can possibly make it uncontested, which is essentially the parties themselves reaching an agreement, signing off on a divorce decree, and just processing it almost ministerially through the family court, versus the parties' inability to reach an agreement. And then you got the attorneys in it, and then you got the judge in it, and the whole court system, and it goes up exponentially. Just to give you a little bit of a overview, an uncontested divorce, Coates and Frey, we charge $500 retainer for an uncontested divorce, and it can be done in, 3 months, 2 months, 3 months, maybe 4 months. The court slows down a little bit sometimes if there's kids involved, because you have to go through that kids first program.
Right, and we're going to cover that later.
But it is very fast and very cheap and very friendly, and makes for a good ongoing relationship within the family. There's a lot to be said for that. The problem, of course, when you've got a contested divorce, is that you don't have any of that. You've got to hire lawyers, and they're expensive. And then once lawyers are hired, you can only communicate through the lawyers. You can't even try and communicate oftentimes between the parties themselves.
Now you have 2 attorneys.
Yeah.
And also now take us where somebody hasn't had a divorce, and we don't want that to happen, but say someone calls you, hey Brad, I want to sit with you. As soon as they sit in your chair, what would you like them to have prepared? Or in most cases they probably sit down and they're very emotional, and they're probably going on a tangent, and what would be preferably to like arm them with information of if they come and consult with you?
Well, the main, obviously the more financial information they can bring, the better.
Okay.
And of course, if you want to be anything remotely resembling an empathetic divorce lawyer, you've got to listen to them, vent to some degree. But you're really not paid to be lawyers are just too expensive to use them as therapists.
Oh, that's a good point, listening audience. It's expensive.
It is expensive. Most lawyers in the range of $250 to $350 an hour. So you don't want to spend a lot of time just chatting.
Okay.
The things that probably the most useful things to know about are house valuations.
Okay.
Knowing the current value of your real property, knowing what the mortgage is, so that you can deduct that out and figure out what the net equity is. And then somebody tries to buy somebody out, or else you can sell it on the open market, or whatever you're going to do. But house valuations, pension valuations are a lot of times something that people forget. Here in Hawaii, pensions are totally divisible, which means that half of my IRA, half of my company pension, anything I've been earning during my life, half of that's going to be allocable to my wife.
May I ask you a question now? The whole half thing, what is that called now in Hawaii?
Well, it's called for pensions, it's called the Linson formula. It's just a case that divides up pensions, and they are divisible based upon half of the number of years that you were married and currently employed in that same job. You may be referring to the half-half thing, which is community property. Community property in California. In Hawaii, we don't have community property. We have what's called equitable distribution, which basically starts at half-half as well. So they're very similar.
Okay.
In California, it's a mandatory half-half decision, whereas in Hawaii, under equitable distribution, the judge can theoretically, they don't do it very often, but they can theoretically swing away from a half-half distribution. If the rich doctor's getting divorced from the nurse, they can give her 55 or 60% of the house proceeds instead of 50-50.
I see.
But then the trade-off is that we go lighter on alimony usually.
Oh, okay.
So California has very, very strict alimony provisions, but you only get maximum of half of the property. We can give you more than half of the property if you're the lower earning spouse, but you then are going to have you're probably going to have less alimony.
So in essence, when someone comes to sit with you for the first time, they should have all their finances together.
Well, as much as possible, but any good divorce lawyer is going to have the court form. You can go online and get the court forms and do those in advance if you really want to be an accelerated. A good student of the good client.
Yeah, because I didn't know that. And how can they get that now?
Well, there's websites, Hoiki on
Hoiki?
you can pull up the paper. There's two sets of financials. There's an income and expense, which is a monthly income statement that tells how much you're making and expending monthly, mainly for use in child support and alimony cases. And then there's an asset and debt statement, which is the overall sort of macro finances that you've got, and that's like the overall balance sheet, and that's where the property division comes in.
Okay, so these are the things that you would help in getting prepared for all of this.
That definitely helps, yeah.
Okay.
But it's also true that sometimes you just need to move ahead. I mean, one of the problems that you have with divorce, being a divorce lawyer and trying to move intelligently for clients is clients are stuck. They don't. It's a very difficult decision to make, and so there's a lot of hemming and hawing. A lot of people that talk about, well, can we just do a separation instead of a divorce? There's a lot of that kind of back and forth, and the problem with that can be that if you hesitate for too long and the other side starts to fire away, then you can next thing you can be in the middle of a contested divorce. Whereas sometimes it's smartest to try and make an uncontested settlement proposal and an overture to try and settle the whole damn thing early on. So you want to you don't want to wait too long moving forward with the case.
Right, and that was another thing. Grounds. In Hawaii, it's a no fault?
It's all no fault. Most of the whole country is no fault nowadays.
Okay.
But the grounds are these, whatever the legislature creates. And in Hawaii, it's the marriage is irretrievably broken, whatever the heck that means. In California, it's irreconcilable differences, whatever the heck that means. So, there are all these kind of, pithy sounding grounds. And basically it means that if one party wants out, they get out. You cannot block somebody from divorcing you. You can slow it down, you can make it cost more, but you can't stop somebody from divorcing. If one side wants a divorce, they get a divorce.
Well, that brings up the question then. I know I read when you were talking about your book, typically it's one person who wants the divorce. What happens to the one that doesn't want the divorce? I mean,
they swallow hard and get divorced anyway.
What do they do? I mean, do they hire their own attorney because you cannot fight against it. It's not like a civil litigation, right? It's totally different.
Well, say you're a good Catholic girl, and which I think the last time I checked you are, and you just don't believe in divorce. You can try and make a motion for reconciliation. I've been doing this for 35 years. I think I've seen that happen twice, and neither time was it successful. You basically, if one side wants to get divorced, they get divorced. You're better just swallowing hard and realizing that's what's going to happen. You can slow it down, you can refuse to cooperate, you can, but I mean, at some point, even if it's by default, you wind up getting divorced regardless.
Yeah. How long have you seen something like this drag out because of that?
Well, it depends, because it kicks, I started to tell you the difference between uncontested and contested divorces. Uncontested, maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 months, very friendly, good for the kids, very cheap. I have $500 retainer. The total cost is maybe $1,000, $1,500, $2,000. Versus a contested divorce, the retainer is $5,000, and the total fees go to 10, 20, 30, 50, God only knows how many thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And the timeline stretches out accordingly.
Yeah.
Because then you're stuck in the court system, and it's not real. They do the best they can to move lots of cases through the courts in Hawaii, but it's slow and unwieldy. And I've seen cases drag out for a couple of years that way.
Yeah, I was just wondering. Yeah, that's a long time. That's a long time.
Well, it's a long time to be in emotional limbo. That's for sure.
And also residency. How's that come into play here?
Well, anybody can get divorced in whatever state they are a resident of, but you can't just fly in, thinking you're on Hawaii for a vacation, and then while you're at it, well, maybe I'll get divorced. You have to actually be a Hawaii resident for 6 months, and that's similar residency requirements apply in most other jurisdictions. Some shorten it up a little bit, some lengthen it out a little bit. Some, you can only have a sort of interlocutory decree, and then they won't process a final decree until several months later. But most everywhere you're looking at a residency of about 6 months. The problem, of course, is if you have a separation where one party leaves Hawaii, goes back to the mainland, whatever, and is there for more than 6 months, then then the person who's remaining can file legitimately in Hawaii, and the person who's moved to Minnesota can file there if they've been there 6 months. So then you get into a conflict of laws situation. Then you get lawyers in both jurisdictions, which is really a mess. It's great for the lawyers, but not so great for the clients.
Okay.
So sometimes, when we were talking earlier about, what all should a client assemble before they come into the office, sometimes tripping over, how much do I need, I'm not quite ready yet, either emotionally or I haven't got the paperwork ready. And sometimes you got to come in and get the advice early on, because there is a difference between who files first. I mean, it's literally seizing the high ground from where the case follows.
I
mean,
see.
if my wife, wises up, decides to divorce me and move, and start something in Minnesota, and I've got to fly back and forth to Minneapolis, St. Paul every time there's a court hearing, I'm not going to be very excited about that, and I'm going to probably cave in on the negotiations at some point. Whereas if I'm still here and she's gone, then then she's got the disadvantage. Almost like the home court advantage in a sporting event.
Oh my.
Although that's a bad analogy.
Yeah,
but,
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and okay, so we're going to move on into temporary orders, which would mean.
Well, there is, the court makes a decision on all issues in a divorce case. Ultimately, and that's what goes into a divorce decree and a final court hearing. But there are some issues that are viewed as being so urgent that they can't wait for the final hearing, which could be a year away for the whole divorce to be granted. So sometimes initial things like temporary custody, temporary child support, temporary occupancy of a marital residence, maybe who's going to get get what car to drive, temporary restraining orders if there's physical violence or somebody's being threatening something, maybe there's going to be some temporary restraining orders. So those kind of things, there's what's called a motion for pre-decree relief, or meaning exactly what it says. Prior to the actual divorce decree itself, you have to get these pre-decree items ironed out initially. And those are expensive, but early on kind of hearings, you can get to those within a month.
Wow, okay. This is all new to me. I mean, I'm pretty sure people never heard of that as well.
Well, again, controlling the pre-decree rulings is crucial. If you get temporary custody, you're more likely to get full custody.
Right.
So sometimes getting the jump on these pre-decree rulings is crucial.
Oh, okay. And then here, we're going to cover issues like property settlements, key property items. So I'll just let you take over on that. Well,
the ones that I discussed briefly earlier, the main information gathering, in Hawaii, people's houses are the big enchilada most of the time. That's the biggie. And real property can be handled a couple of different ways. If the parties themselves, again, that all through this, there's the theme. When I wrote my book called Divorce with Decency, and we should probably show people a copy of that one of these times. But the theme behind that is to try and reach your own agreement and do it expeditiously and economically. Don't get stuck in the quicksand of the whole contested litigation if you can possibly help it. If parties can agree and come into the court and say, Judge, husband's going to buy wife out of the house, he's got X amount of time to do it, he's going to take over the mortgage, he's going to pay her $300,000 for her 50-50 share of the net equity, and the court says, okay, if you guys have got that figured out, they'll gladly approve that. Conversely, if both sides want to buy each other out of the house and they can't agree on a price and they can't agree on much of anything, or can't get refinancing for so as to take the other one off the mortgage, the court is not going to get into the real estate business. They're not going to say, well, it sounds like your appraiser, Mrs. Larita, just to pick one name at random, it sounds like your house appraiser has the better number than his appraiser, so we're going to go with your number and we'll let you buy the house for X amount. They're not going to make those kind of rulings. They got 5,000 cases going through family court during any given year in Hawaii.
Now, you as an attorney, well, how do you get involved in that part, or no?
Well, you try and make an intelligent assessment of what the buyout ought to be, and you tell the clients, hey, look, if you guys can decide this, that's fine. If you can't reach a decision on it, the court is just going to say sell the property on the open market, because then it solves all the issues as to how much the house is worth, right? The person comes in and pays whatever they're going to pay, and that becomes the value right there. And they get new money as far as financing, so you don't have to make. One of the big problems that tried to buy the other side out of the house is that you've got to refinance the mortgage. Otherwise, you're in the uncomfortable position of, maybe you sold out your interest in the house, and you gave up the title, but you're still on the mortgage, which means that you can't get another mortgage. The credit reports come.
If it becomes delinquent, oh my.
Yeah, that's right. It can mess up your credit.
Right.
Plus, when the credit reports companies that would go through and TRW and the mortgage companies want to take a look at the mortgage, and they say, oh, Justine, you would qualify ordinarily, but I see you're already on $500,000 debt for your ex-husband's house. You're dead in the water. You're not going to get any financing.
So these are the type of things, if you're a homeowner, you need to think about.
Right. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is that retirement is divisible. So, especially if you're in the military or the federal government, some of these, that's the reason why people take a lot of those jobs, because they got such good benefits.
Wow.
So that's divisible. Not 1/2 of the entire amount of your husband's retirement, but you get half of the retirement that was accrued during the time of marriage. So if he's been a military guy for 20 years, you were married to him for 10 years, you get half the time that you were married. So if he was accruing retirement and married to you half of that time.
During that 10 years.
During the 10 years over the 20, it's the numerator with the denominator, and then you multiply that by half. So you would get a quarter in that situation. You get a quarter of your husband's retirement.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people realize that comes into play as well.
They will after they see your podcast.
If the husband or the wife has some type of retirement, they can take it away with them. That's not true.
That's definitely not true, and people definitely think that if there's any issue, there's two issues that guys in particular are very, very touchy about. One is their soon-to-be ex-wife trying to grab their retirement, and the other is alimony. I mean, it's very hard to settle cases like that because these guys just don't want to ante up.
Right.
But it is the law that you're entitled to half of the retirement, so you can force that through if you have to.
Wow.
It's offset, of course, by her retirement. And this is all gender neutral, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
You got a retirement plan, I get half of that too.
Right. Okay. So
This
maybe
is if we were married.
this is like it kind of wipes each other out if they're both in their careers just as long, right?
Yeah, but again, it depends on who's got the better job, who's got the bigger retirement. Yeah. So
typically, it's the guy.
So sometimes you just value the two retirement plans and offset that, and somebody else takes the house and somebody takes the retirement plan. Or, there's clever ways to do this, and they're actually pretty simple if you get to them soon enough, and you get. You can use divorce mediators, for example.
Yeah, that's a thing I've never heard of before. I saw that on your door.
Yeah.
Mediators.
Well, I've had a divorce with decency mediation clinic for years. I just mediated out a case that had been bouncing around for the better part of a year, bouncing around between attorneys, and I mediated the whole thing out in an hour and a half.
So that's an alternative, a mediator.
And smart.
See, that's another thing I didn't know.
Another
Now
podcast.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
What is this Hussey case?
Well, this is an old case name that talks about the categories of property division. Are we just looking at Hawaii, or is this going to go everywhere? This podcast.
It's going to go everywhere, but it's based in Hawaii.
In Hawaii, but it's not true necessarily in all other jurisdictions. We have categories of property division. So if you have property, going into a marriage, you're worth $1 million as the time you go in. If you can document that, and that $1 million turns into $2 million, the owner spouse gets that first $1 million back. You only get what's accrued during the time of marriage, although you get everything that's accrued during time of marriage. So again, let's go back to you and me being married. Kind of an exciting thought. I see how cute you look on this podcast.
Oh.
Okay, so I'm the higher earner, and just because I stuck it in Brad Coates' bank account doesn't mean that Justine doesn't get her half, even though I've been earning more.
Right.
That your earnings are all joint. It's the marital partnership theory. So you get half of everything I've got during the time we're married, or everything I earn while we're married. But you don't get half of my first $1 million if I brought that into the marriage. Yeah. Likewise, if I chose my parents correctly and inherited $1 million, you don't get half of that. But you do get half of the appreciation of even separately held previous to marriage property or inherited property.
Earning interest.
Stock market increases, property values going up.
All right.
So again, say you had the dubious good fortune to marry me. You move into my house. I've got a house in Kahala. It's worth $1 million when we get married. Then it goes up to $2 million during the course of the marriage. I get the first $1 million back, but you get half of the appreciation, even though it was my house that appreciated.
Yeah, and that's another thing we're going to go into in a different show is probably prenuptial. So that's a whole different other. That's
the way you get around these. That is the way you get around these. So quickly, we could talk about custody.
Sure.
Custody is broken down into legal custody versus physical custody. Joint, and either of those can either be sole or joint. So you can have sole legal and sole physical custody. If you're the mom, a lot of moms want to try for that. You can have joint legal but sole physical to one parent or the other, or you can have joint where everything's joint. Both the legal and the physical custody. Now, the difference between legal custody and physical custody is that legal custody pertains to the macro life-affecting issues in the child's lives. Where they go to school, private versus public, religious upbringing, whether they get married or drive a car, whether they're still a minor or join the Marines or whatever, the kind of stuff the parents have got to sign for their kids for.
Right.
If you've got joint custody, that's got to be decided jointly.
Okay.
Physical custody is who they actually live with. And so you could have joint legal custody where you each have access to the parent-teacher conferences, and both parents have got to choose the course of study in colleges, et cetera, et cetera. But physical custody, the kids live with either mom or dad. In that case, the non-custodial parent pays child support, and again, that's gender neutral. So if dad gets custody, mom pays child support. It's not, it's not like dads pay everything anymore.
And traditionally, we see that the mom has the kids majority of the time.
That probably breaks down that way in the past. A lot of times, historically, I think guys just didn't fight for custody, so they didn't know they could get it, so they didn't get it.
Right.
Nowadays, the court will zero in on joint physical custody the bulk of the time. Unless somebody's really a bonehead and has a real problem, maybe a DUI or tests dirty for drugs or has spouse abuse issues, or spouse abuse is a deal breaker in these things right away, because they attribute a propensity to violence, even if it's toward the spouse. They worry about that parlaying over for the child as well. So those issues can be deal breakers, but assuming you haven't got any real deal breaker issues, and assuming everybody's staying in Hawaii, which you can't always assume. I mean, a lot of times in Hawaii, one party is going to relocate away from the island, so joint physical custody becomes impossible.
Right.
But if you can get beyond those kinds of issues, then generally the court's going to want to see joint physical custody and try and steer you that way. But like I say, a lot of guys are still unaware that they can do that. So the custody does still go the majority of the time to women, but a far smaller majority than it used to be. I mean, it used to be like 70-75% of the time the Wahini's got custody, and now it's probably much lower than that.
Yeah, in my case, we have both the physical custody aspect of it. We have our daughter 1 week on, 1 week off.
Yeah, so that's
that's
joint legal and joint physical custody.
Okay.
But you probably notice you don't get a whole lot of child support, because that cuts the child support down dramatically, because you've only got the child half the time.
Right. It only makes sense that if you have the child majority of the time, you need more financial support.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So in another way to think of it is if the guys are financially strapped, can you say they can, if they're fit, should do more of time with the child, so they don't have to pay
well, you can, but I mean, people don't want to give up extra time with their kids, just to jockey child support very often. I mean, people want the time that they can get with their kids. If they can get half the time, they're going to take half the time. So you start, and you've got to not only put it in your divorce decree, you've got to walk the walk thereafter. If you put in that you're going to take joint physical custody, but the Wahini winds up doing most of the heavy lifting, and the guy just disappears and is typical guy, then the woman's getting basically screwed as far as not getting the full child support.
Then you would have to revisit the whole thing.
Yeah. And anything regarding kids can be revisited all the way through age 18 or age 23.
Yeah, that's good.
So you can have child custody be structured one way, and then that parent craps out and doesn't really do a great job, or gets arrested, or starts to live with a crackhead, or starts a meth lab in the former marital residence. That's a good way to lose custody. So you can bring in that evidence, and even just failure to really exercise your full time with the child. If somebody keeps a daytimer and says, hey, I agreed to joint custody, but I thought he was going to step up to the line. Turns out he's really only had him on weekends, and that's closer to being full custody to mom with reasonable visitation to dad.
Do we have something in Hawaii called deadbeat dad?
Well, I think everywhere they have deadbeat dads. I mean, they have the issue of whether or not guys that are ordered to pay child support actually continue, fully pay it, and that used to be a huge problem. And then it actually goes back to the President Reagan, who figured out that if the parents who really had the kids didn't pay the child support, then the mom, in those days it was oftentimes the mom, winds up on public assistance that the taxpayers are paying support. So they cracked down and made a mandatory child support set of guidelines nationwide, and they made mandatory payments through something called the CSEA, the Child Support Enforcement Agency. So it's not just the woman, like it was when I first started practicing, the wife trying to chase the ex-wife trying to chase those, oh, please give me my child support. Now it gets deducted right out of his paycheck and gets sent to the CSEA and then sent to mom.
Yeah, that's good.
So it's a major difference.
So now here, do we want to cover these miscellaneous, or do you think that's a whole different ball of wax?
Well, in the miscellaneous issues, I had talked about prenuptials. prenups, a lot of people don't think they're worth the paper they're written on because there's always this kind of, misinformed assumption that, you really can't govern. And it used to be that they were unenforceable, but then states have started passing. We passed a uniform premarital act back in, I think it was the late 80s. And they are, if they're done correctly now, they are going to be enforceable. So to do them correctly means you got to have the opportunity for counsel on both sides. You got to have full disclosure of finances on both sides. But you can, in that situation, you can agree. You can say, okay, I'll marry you, Justine, but you're not going to get any. You're not going to get any of my money out of the deal.
I imagine, because I've never been through it before, but I imagine that it's kind of like an emotional thing for either side, especially what mostly it would be the woman, right? Where they want to get married, but he says, "Here, honey, I'd like you to have a prenuptial," and I imagine it's kind of like a, "Oh, you don't trust me" type of thing. You know what I mean?
It's exactly what it's like. Sure.
I mean, do you see this often? A lot?
Yeah, I mean that is the public relations issue that goes along with prenups. Is how do you present it to your spouse, and is she going to agree? And then if she doesn't agree, what's going to happen? And you got to do it far enough in advance of the wedding so that it doesn't turn into duress or coercion too, because that will blow open a prenup. So you got to really hash this out, and then it's almost like a big game of chicken. If you. I'll marry you if you sign the prenup. Okay, I won't sign the prenup. Okay, I won't marry you. I mean, it turns into sometimes who wants to get married the most, right?
Right. Explain to the listening audience exactly what duress is.
Well, in the context of a prenup, it would be, for example, that you're about to get married next week, and then and all the wedding invitations are already out. You've got a big 300-person wedding planned for the lawn at the Royal Hawaiian, and all the families are coming, and then he hands you the prenup. It says, "Sign here." And she goes, "What are you talking about?" And he says, "Well, either that or call off the wedding." And she goes, "Oh my God, I don't want to be embarrassed in front of all my friends." So she's been essentially forced to sign the prenup in that case.
What a way to start a marriage, though.
That's not good, and it's really not very good for the prenup, because that's not the way it's supposed to be done. You want them signed well in advance of the wedding, with the opportunity to fully disclose all the finances, review each other's finances, know what you're really getting into, have attorneys on both sides. Attorneys are supposed to sign off on these things. I won't do them without having attorneys on the other side. We do a lot of them because I went to UCLA for law school and was licensed in California before I came here in 1978 or whatever. And California had a prenup statute before Hawaii did, so I was doing them even years earlier. We've done lots of them, but you've got to be very, very careful about how they're done. And the attorney's got to be careful about how they're done, because otherwise somebody comes back to you and says, "Hey, you told me 20 years ago you had my okole covered in this thing, and instead, my wife broke the prenup, and I think you ought to pay it."
Let me ask you this: a marriage that starts with a prenup, the statistics of divorces, you said 45–50%. Is it equal to prenups as well, or is this?
Well, I don't know that there's specific statistics that I've never seen on how many divorces are involved prenups. Relatively few. It still has not caught on big time. I mean, we do a lot more divorces than we do prenups. And if they had prenups, the divorce case would be a lot easier. A lot of times it's for people that have been divorced before, second marriages. Sometimes if you got family kids by a first marriage, and you want to make sure that they're protected. That's a legitimate reason to do it. If you're in a business situation where you don't want your business partner getting sucked into your divorce, that's another reason to do it. If you're inheriting family money, or if one side has, a lot of times it's for older people. I don't see young kids coming in and saying, "Oh, geez, I heard about these, and I'm worried enough about divorce." Most of the time, it's veterans of prior divorce, or have already got other families, or they've got some money that they've accrued to protect. I mean, if you're going to be in a marriage that just starts out with both of you having nothing and trying to work your way up as a young couple to achieve whatever you're going to achieve jointly, maybe there's really no need for a prenup. But if you get a rich guy or gal marrying somebody that that they've just met, that's probably a good idea to get a prenup.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot of spectrums of the whole divorce process, and I think that's a good start. And letting the people know what is involved, even if it's your second marriage. Oh gosh, God forbid. But do you see laws changing all the time as far as divorce goes, or it's just pretty steady?
Well, the law itself does not change all that much.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can you get over to the Divorce with Decency book? I don't know if I'll have to
Sure.
keep talking, and
Yeah.
and you can maybe get a copy of the book. This book that I'm about to show you, I've rewritten 4 different times. It's now in its 4th edition by the University of Hawaii Press, and basically, it gets fatter every time, much like its author. It was about half the size when I wrote the first one in like 1998. It's not what's caused this book to get heftier is not changes in law. It is the fact that society is changing, and we should do a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, we will.
There's the
We
book.
will.
And it's got this
And
ridiculous
we
title.
will let you know how you can get a hold of this book too, and that's going to be a whole different episode, because I am really intrigued with this book, not only because it's in its 4th revision, but ironically, Brad has in there how to save your marriage.
I do.
And that's
It's
what
right
I
there.
want to point out.
It's right there in the title.
On
I don't know if
there?
it says, "Can your marriage be saved?"
As
and
he's
then
showing the
love
book.
in the internet age.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the
Mhm.
kind of things that change. When I wrote this book in 1998, people weren't hooking up on Match.com.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't getting divorced because a wife found her husband's cell phone records and
Mhm.
found out that he'd been dating
Well,
Mitzi.
we're going to keep
So,
that for
yeah.
a whole different
So
episode,
that is-
and I really want to hone in and just dedicate a whole episode to your book. But for now, we're going to close this one episode, and thank you so much, Bradley Coates. He's going to be a recurring family law attorney, and for those of you listening to the podcast, he's doing his very
Shaka.
clean, like,
Yeah.
shaka. And so, agents of change, I hope this really helped you. If you know someone going through this, please pass this podcast on, or if you're watching the video, copy the link and send it to someone who may need it, who's going through it and could use any help possible. And while we don't want divorces, it's just a true reality, and so we want to make it as smooth as possible, if that's even possible. But I think this is very valuable, Brad. A lot of things that people don't know. So until next time with Bradley Coates, we're going to say ahui ho.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to the Legal Advice in Paradise podcast. For more information, visit www.legaladviceinparadise.com.